George was a baker. In fact, fellow Toastmasters, George was an excellent baker. And George should be an excellent baker. After all, his father was a baker. His father's father was a baker. His father's father's father was a baker. His father's 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 father was in the army. Okay, not sure how that one got in there either. George's specialty was desserts. And George knew how to bake desserts. George would bake cakes, chocolate cakes, birthday cakes, wedding cakes, the aroma filling the house, Boston cream pies, and pies. Oh my, could George bake a pie. Sizzling apple pies, and custards and flans, and pecan pies, and oh my, he was the world's best at baking. One day, George had a really sweet idea. He was going to open up his own bakery. And he was going to open it right there at his house. And George started to remodel his garage. He had a big garage. This would be where his bakery would go. And he wanted nothing but the best, so George called up the Big Horn Restaurant Manufacturing Company and told them, I want to order one of your smallest little ovens and a little tiny freezer. Well, George was a good baker, but he wasn't rich. Soon the equipment arrived, and George started making his bakery. And then he started painting it. Mocha browns, lime greens, custard yellows. That's it, George thought. I'm going to name my bakery Custards. And so it was. And the people came, and they bought his desserts. After a couple of years, George's business was doing so well, he decided to expand. And he opened up his second bakery, and it was doing well. And the people came, and they bought George's desserts. And after a couple more years, business was running so good that for a third time, George opened another bakery, and the people came, and they bought George's desserts. And at this point, George noticed that his profits were rising like the Pillsbury Doughboy in the middle of the desert. And he decided to open up a fourth bakery, and the people came, and they bought George's desserts. You could say by this point, George was rolling in the dough. Pun intended. And that's when the great big pie in the sky had a little slice of reality for George. The land went into a recession, and the people weren't quite buying as many of George's desserts, and he saw his profits were leveling off. But that didn't bother George, because the people were still coming. They weren't buying as many, but they were still there. And then the big pie in the sky had another large slice of reality for George, right in his face. The land went into a depression. And now the people weren't coming to George's bakery. They weren't buying his desserts. And George saw that his profits were starting to fall like a bad souffle. So George had to close one of the bakeries. His profits were still falling. George had to close another one, and then a third bakery. And George knew soon he was going to have to close his original bakery. So George did what we all do when we run into financial problems. He had a bake sale. He baked up his last batch of desserts, the best ones he'd ever made. And George opened the doors for his last day of sale. And the people came, and the people bought his desserts. And soon, George was down to just 2 desserts left in his bakery. And he decided at that point, whatever one was left, he was going to freeze to remind him of the better days. And the final customer came in, looked at the 2 desserts, bought the banana cream pie. Good choice, by the way, it's my favorite. And George carefully boxed it up, handed it to him, and told him, dessert's on the house today. And he walked the man over to the door, let him out, and as he walked out, George closed the door, turned the lock, flipped the sign from open to close, and he walked back to his display. And he took out that last dessert. He very carefully made a box of it, putting it in there. He walked over to his freezer, and as he was about to put it into the freezer, he pulled out his pen, and on top of the box he wrote, "Here, in the Little Bighorn, is Custard's last flan."